Hello everyone, today we will learn about another case. The case of Mary Stauffer. Mary was born in West Duluth, Minnesota, USA, and her family moved to the neighboring town of Hummontown when she was 10 years old. She had 3 siblings, all of whom graduated from a local school and planned to go to college. Mary attended college and graduated in 1965. She loved working with children and dreamed of teaching, a dream that came true when she got a job at a school. She is a math teacher. In her personal life, everything was also successful. She married a seminary graduate, Irv Stauffer. They were devout Baptists. They first went to the Philippines as missionaries in 1967, and the trip was successful. Mary taught in Minneapolis for a couple of years. Then they moved to Polk, Nebraska, where her husband was asked to become the pastor of a congregation. They dedicated themselves to serving the church there, where both of their children were born. In 1975, they returned to the Philippines to undertake a 4-year mission trip. There, they planted new churches on the islands and returned home to Minnesota in 1979. Mary was planning to go to the Philippines again, this time intending to take her children with her. A few days before the family was to leave for the Philippines, while they were in the suburbs of St. Paul, they were destined to meet a person who would turn their lives upside down. On May 16, 1980, the day began normally for 8-year-old Elizabeth and her mother, Mary. They arrived and parked near a hair salon on Cleveland Avenue. When they left the salon, they headed to their car. Mary immediately noticed a young man, who looked to be about 30, confidently approaching them from the direction of a busy intersection. He looked at them strangely, and Mary instinctively felt uncomfortable under his gaze, but she did not panic since they were in a busy area. This young man did not look particularly dangerous. He stood out because of his thick glasses. Mary assumed he was merely asking for directions or something similar. However, when he approached the car, he took a gun from his belt, placed it next to the hood, and demanded a ride. In horror, Mary was ready to give up the keys to the car that the church had given them if only he would let them go. But the criminal did not want the keys. He forced Mary and her daughter to sit in the front, demanded that she drive north. Mary tried to influence the attacker, calm him down, and persuade him to let them go. She convinced him that if there were any problems, he could turn to the church, which would not abandon its parishioners in trouble. Mary stoically remained calm, trying to soothe the kidnapper and even bribing him. However, all her efforts were in vain. She even turned to the Bible, but the kidnapper was clearly not ready to listen to the Holy Scriptures. He ordered them to be quiet and keep driving. When they stopped at the nearest intersection, a patrolman pulled up next to their car. The kidnapper threatened to kill Elizabeth if they went in the same direction as the policeman or gave him a signal. Mary was forced to change their route, and the kidnapper noticeably relaxed. They drove to a wooded area in Anoka, stopping at a deserted camping site. There, the attacker ordered them out of the car and deeper into the vegetation, cautiously looking around. He forced them into the trunk, tied the mother and daughter together, taped their mouths shut. He then got behind the wheel and drove into the countryside. There, he planned to pick up a spare tire for his van, placing it in a trunk right on top of the captives. At that moment, 2 neighborhood boys became curious about what was happening and came dangerously close. One stood in front of the car while the other, named Jason Wilkman, approached the trunk from behind. The little boy curiously looked at the wheel and seemed to notice something underneath it. The kidnappers saw Jason and panicked. Without thinking twice, he grabbed Jason and threw him into the trunk with the others. When Jason's friends saw what had happened, he immediately ran home to tell his family. The kidnapper chased after him but was too far behind to catch up. In a panic, he jumped behind the wheel and took off. Jason was crying, and Mary tried to talk to him, but he was too scared, could only tell her his name and age. She tried to calm the children down, and it worked. At least they stopped crying. The trip was short, but Mary heard them moving around in the rough terrain. Branches and bushes constantly hit the vehicle as the criminal drove deep into the forest for several kilometers. Here, he pulled Jason out of the trunk and took him away. A few minutes later, he returned alone, did not open the trunk, but simply got behind the wheel and drove away. Mary prayed that he would just let the innocent child go because she did not hear any shots, but gloomy thoughts crept into her mind. Mary's car was left in the bushes. It was hard to see because he was increasing the distance from the police. The kidnapper got into a black van without windows, along with Mary and her daughter. Before driving off, he double-checked the ropes on his captives, then returned to the city and took them to his electronics store, where he allowed them to use the toilet and gave them juice to drink. They stretched their limbs, which had gone numb. Mary tried to find out what he wanted, but instead of answering, he taped both their mouths shut again, tied them up, put them back in the van, and drove them to his family's house in a neighboring town. The small house was only 10 kilometers from the apartment where the Stauffer lived with their children. Nevertheless, Mary and daughter did not know where they were. They were mistaken while he wandered through many places. The criminal took both of them to the bedroom of the house, which was small, dark, and cramped. He removed the door handle and locked the door. Getting used to the darkness and looking around, Mary and her daughter realized they were in a kind of storage room filled with clothes, toys, but there was nothing that could help them. At the same time, Mary's husband, Irv, and her son, Steve, were waiting for the return of the mother and daughter from the beauty salon. They had a family dinner planned, and the last preparations were to be made before leaving. Both should have returned long ago, which began to worry the household. At 4:30 p.m., Irv called the salon, and the hairdresser confirmed that the visitors had left long ago but had no idea where they were going or what could have happened. Irv called his wife's friends, but they did not know where she might be. Then he turned to other members of the Baptist community and involved them in the search. They all called local hospitals, acquaintances, police stations, and even morgues to find the missing. When no information could be obtained, Irv contacted the police. However, from the very beginning, it was obvious that they suspected of himself of the disappearance of his wife. By that night, the authorities were already engaged in the search for a 6-year-old boy, Jason Wilkman. The search for Mary continued. Irv explained that he was not involved in the disappearance of his wife and daughter. He and his son were waiting for them at home and had no idea what happened after they left the hairdresser. But the authorities did not believe him and suspected he had done something to them. The next morning, a car was found. They even managed to find 2 sets of fingerprints on the steering wheel, but their owners were not in the police database. The car had no license plate, so investigators could not determine whose car it was. The area around the car began to be thoroughly searched. First of all, they found the car's license plate. It had been torn off when the criminal escaped through the bushes. Suspicions arose that Jason's abduction and the disappearance of Mary and her child could be connected. This helped them know that the car belonged to Mary. It seemed that everything was very serious, and the missing persons were in danger. About 300 police officers and volunteers were gathered to begin the search operation. Announcements were published featuring images of the missing. Based on the words of the boy's friend, a composite sketch of the kidnapper was created. From that moment on, the authorities' suspicions regarding Mary's husband only intensified. Ironically, the composite sketch bore a striking resemblance to him. Both he and the kidnapper were dark-haired, wore glasses. Irv became the main suspect in the disappearance of the 2 children and Mary. However, Irv provided an alibi supported by a photo and passed a lie detector test. His fingerprints did not match those found in the car, yet the authorities still did not want to clear him as a suspect. Irv continued to emphasize his innocence and pointed out that the investigation's misconceptions were leading them away from the real goals of the search operation. Before her first trip to the Philippines, Mary had taught at the school, and among her 9th grade students was Ming Sun Shiu, a teenager of Taiwanese American descent, with whom Mary had a good relationship. He showed great promise in sports and also had significant academic success. It seemed that the teenager had a great future ahead of him. Later, former students of Mary said that Ming was enamored with his math teacher. He thought she seemed smart and stately. After Mary went to the Philippines, she returned and moved to another city. Ming became truly obsessed with his teacher and constantly remembered her. He began to pursue his secret love, and it looked radical. Confusing the younger of Stauffer with his father, also named Irv, Ming showed up at Mary's inn, Law's house in Duluth on the 4th of July and held a senior at gunpoint. Ming took him into the house and told him to call his wife to the room. When Mary's mother-in-law entered, Ming realized his mistake. Ming claimed he was simply mistaken and threatened that if they went to the police, he would return and shoot them both, and then he ran away. The elderly couple had no idea that Ming was really interested in the younger Irv. They never reported it anywhere and didn't even tell the mayor and his son about the incident until they returned from the Philippines in 1979. No one had any idea who could have attacked the families, neither the motive nor the goals were known. Mary only found out that the attack was carried out by Ming when he had already taken her and her daughter prisoner. He proudly told her about it before attacking her. Mary had no idea that he had been spying on the family from the forest, which was located not far from the house where they settled. Probably, he decided to attack because he saw preparations for departure and understood that soon they could leave again for a long time. Shortly before the kidnapping, Ming even tried to get through the doors of the patio, but nothing came of it. Later, he attempted to get through the storage room and drilled several holes. Burr found sawdust and removed it, but he still did not understand the relevance of their appearance. Now everything fell into place. In the meantime, the captives experienced the hospitality of the criminal. Immediately after the kidnapping, Ming admitted that Mary was lucky that her family was not nearby during the surprise attack, as he was ready to do anything to take her, even kill everyone. The next day after the kidnapping, he pulled Mary out of the closet, spread a blanket on the floor in the living room, tied her up. After that, he made a 3-hour video interview in which he revealed his identity. Mary remembered Ming when he spoke about math lessons at school. He reminded her that he was the student she had failed in exams. Mary immediately recalled who he was but could not understand what he meant. He told her that he couldn't get an academic scholarship because of her, as his parents had died, and he couldn't afford to go to college because of that. After losing his place in school, he was drafted into the Vietnam War, which led him to a prison camp where he experienced some tough times. He blamed Mary for all of this. Now, he wanted to make her pay. There was one flaw in this tragic story: Ming had made it all up. Mary remembered perfectly well that he graduated from high school with excellent marks, so he could easily have received a scholarship to any college. In reality, he attended the University of Minnesota and graduated from there. He never served in the army and instead immediately opened his own store. Mary realized that his story was a lie designed to impose a sense of guilt and manipulate her. In fact, Ming lived in a fictional world. He wrote fantasy stories about many women whom he abused, and after that, they begged him to be with them. Among these fantasies was his 9th grade math teacher. During a video interview, he revealed his intent not to cause physical pain but to inflict emotional trauma so that she would feel dirty, humiliated, and insulted. The footage included more than 6 hours of assaults. Over the next few days, a friend of Ming returned a borrowed camera but kept the tape of the torture. He abused Mary daily. Ming claimed he was not a pedophile. He never abused Elizabeth, nor did he force her to watch the torture of her mother, although he repeatedly threatened to do so. Unfortunately, this did not mean that Beth would remain on the sidelines of his villainous fantasies. Elizabeth turned out to be a pawn in his fictional stories. Ming demanded that Mary show love, but she refused because she was a believer and a devoted wife who had promised to love only her husband. To force she to submit, he threatened to place her daughter in a thick plastic bag and tie it shut, claiming that it would take 4 to 5 minutes for Beth to inhale all the oxygen, after which she would die. He also threatened to kill all the members of her family one by one until Mary obeyed. Mary was forced to meet him halfway. She kissed him on the cheek, feigning love, but this was not enough. Only a kiss on the lips calmed him down. Then he removed the bag from her daughter's head. Later, during a similar incident, he left Elizabeth in his van for 4 hours. This happened on a hot summer day, and in the scorching sun, the girl miraculously did not die. This experience finally convinced Mary of the need to obey him, otherwise, they would be in trouble. In the meantime, their family continued to hope that they would see both Mary and Elizabeth alive. Weeks went by, and according to statistics, the probability of the missing returning after such a long period was practically zero. After 2 weeks, the police called Irv and reported that they had found a woman's body in the forest, which was presumed to be Mary's. He provided his wife's dental records and was relieved to learn that it was not her, and therefore, there was still hope for the safe return of both his wife and daughter. Meanwhile, life in captivity continued. After some time, Ming softened the strict rules of the internal regulations. He allowed his captive to eat in the kitchen, take a shower on the 10th day, even gave Elizabeth several board games and a TV. He began to affectionately call her Betty. Despite the circumstances, this looked very unpleasant. During this period, Ming forced Mary to write 2 letters to her husband. In the first letter, she was to convince the police that she had not disappeared but had simply run away from her hated husband, whom she no longer loved. In the second letter, he voiced demands that the police stop their interference, or else no one would ever see either of them again. Ming still led a double life. He was involved in business management and worked in his electronics store as if nothing had happened. From the outside, it seemed that he was quite decent and that his life was completely ordinary. In reality, he was a kidnapper and a murderer. After 3 weeks, Ming took a rented mobile home and went with his victims to the fair in Chicago. Before that, they stopped at a shopping center in Madison, Wisconsin, to change clothes, as they had been wearing their old clothes since the abduction. Both victims were under close watch from him. He would not allow them to escape. He kept one of the 2 by his side, and in case of escape, he promised to kill the other. This was how he was able to grant them some relative freedom of movement, albeit within reasonable limits. Despite all of Mary's efforts to warn the police by using a receipt from her bag while shopping, the bank was notified and, unfortunately, the FBI never received the information. It apparently got lost. When Elizabeth was left unattended for a while in a shopping mall, she attempted to tell a group of teenagers that something had been stolen, but they just laughed and walked away, not believing her story. By the end of this little trip, all 3 even stopped by the University of Minnesota campus to watch fireworks. During this time, at least 3 police cars drove past them. However, Mary knew that the criminal had a gun with him, and she feared that he might harm them without thinking twice if she called for help. So she remained silent, despite her hopes. On July 7, 1980, Mary and Elizabeth faced serious difficulties. Ming realized that he could not remain in his house forever without being noticed. Therefore, he decided to buy a mobile home for the 3 of them, making it clear that he intended to continue this madness and wanted to eliminate any possibility of being caught. Mary understood that there might not be any other chances to escape, so she planned to wait for him to leave for work before trying to free herself. The next morning, Ming went to work as usual, and Mary began her fight for freedom. She managed to muster enough strength to remove the heavy door from its hinges, from which the captive's shackles were attached. Until that moment, they had been unable to do this. Suddenly, she heard some noise and feared that Ming had returned. Mary was instantly frightened. She acted quickly and returned everything to its original state, as if they were still tied up. They seemed to sit and listen forever until finally, they calmed down, realizing that Ming was gone. The nervous tension played a cruel joke on them, but the situation did not improve because precious time had been lost. Mary had no idea when their tormentor would return. She got to the phone and called the county sheriff's office. She was put on hold twice before finally contacting the detective who was leading the search for the 3 missing people. Thanks to a tag from a dry cleaner, she provided the address where she and her daughter live. Mary was most shocked by the policeman's question about whether Jason was with them. It was then that she realized that the child had never returned home and was probably killed in that forest during a stop. In fear of Ming's return, they simply hid in the storage room, afraid that their tormentor would soon come back. Fortunately, the police arrived before long, and the mother and daughter were freed. Both victims were photographed, having remained shackled with bicycle cables for almost 2 months. FBI agents went to Ming's shop, searches were conducted, and the criminal was arrested without resistance. A few days later, Mary went north to visit her family. Her happy release from captivity, along with her daughter, became a real sensation. However, in reality, their misadventures were not over yet. Just a few days after being incarcerated, Ming hired a killer. It turned out to be a cellmate, Richard Green, who was about to be released from prison. He asked Green to commit the murder of Mary and Elizabeth so that they could not testify against him. Additionally, Green was supposed to help Ming escape from prison in exchange for a promise of $50,000 once the job was done. As an advance, he handed over a check for $1,000. Fortunately, this plot failed, and the criminal was caught. Richard did not admit that he was hired. This was only discovered during a second interrogation and after checking the financial transactions. The prosecutor's office had more than enough evidence to build a strong case. The jury ultimately viewed a 3-hour interview that fully revealed Ming's insidious plan. The hearing was a tense moment for all involved. The mayor had to walk between the prosecution and defense tables. As soon as she asked Mary the first question, Ming jumped up and attacked the mayor. However, the prosecutor blocked his path. The guards knocked him down and immobilized him. The hearing lasted 10 days, after which Ming was found guilty of kidnapping. Difficulties arose even before the hearing began. He confessed to one of the psychiatrists who worked with him that he knew where the body of Jason Wilkman. He was then offered a plea bargain. The authorities agreed to reduce the charge to second-degree murder. In late October, Ming led the police to the boy's body. Jason had died from blunt force trauma to the head, inflicted from behind. Ultimately, Ming Sen Shiu was sentenced to life in prison but retained the possibility of parole after 30 years. Mary then had to testify again as a material witness in the trial for Jason's murder. It seemed that this terrible story was about to end. However, this time Ming was prepared for the meeting. He secretly brought a knife into the courtroom. During cross-examination, when Mary was answering questions, he jumped up from his chair, grabbed her by the neck from behind, and took her hostage, holding the blade near her throat. Fortunately, there was a policeman behind who managed to snatch the knife away and prevent the murder. As a result, Mary suffered a cut that went through her chin and the corner of her mouth, requiring 62 stitches. The second trial was postponed. As part of a plea bargain, Ming confessed to the kidnapping and second-degree murder of Jason, after which he was sentenced to 40 years in prison, with the terms of the sentences to be served concurrently. The case of this dangerous criminal was again in the spotlight. In 2010, the judge ruled that, in the case of parole, Ming Sen would be sent to undergo a state program for individuals who have committed violent abuse crimes. According to the judge, Ming met the criteria for criminals who require life imprisonment. After many hours of evaluating psychiatric reports, it was decided that he posed a permanent threat to society. For Mary, this decision came as a great relief, as Ming had openly declared to Beth, and then the entire family, that if he were ever released, he would come for them. Curiously, Ming's business was estimated by experts to be worth about $250,000. The Stauffer family filed a civil suit against him as compensation for illegal restriction of freedom and emotional distress. However, upon hearing about this, Mary declared that the right to seek justice belonged only to the Lord God, and she refused to pursue the case. After all these events, Mary repeatedly stated that despite all the evil this man caused, she continues to pray for him. Ming Sen Shiu is currently being held at the medium-security federal prison in Marion, Illinois. The ordeal of Mary Stauffer and her daughter Elizabeth stands as a chilling testament to the depths of obsession and the fragility of ordinary life. Yet, through nearly 2 months of unimaginable torment, Mary's unwavering faith and courage not only secured their escape but also illuminated a path of resilience for her family. The tragic death of Jason Wilkman and the scars left on the Stauffers underscore the devastating ripple effects of one individual's malice. Decades later, with Ming confined and deemed a perpetual danger, Mary's choice to forgive and pray for her captor reflects a profound strength that transcends vengeance. Her story endures as both a sobering warning of unchecked obsession and an inspiring